Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 16 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian for 12 years and counting, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that'll help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that the ideas expressed on this podcast are my own, or when appropriate, I cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I would like to begin this episode by saying that the show notes for this episode are particularly ridiculous and lengthy, and if you would like to have an idea of the internet rabbit hole I ventured down into this week, please take a look. I did include some videos, which are both distracting and amusing. So this week, Twitter was losing its mind over the Netflix series Tidying Up with Marie Kondo, and I actually listened to both of her books a few years ago. We had just moved back into the family home to take care of my mom, and I did appreciate the message of reducing and minimizing one's clutter, as we were going to be combining households and had had 3 garage sales in 18 months. The last thing I would do is to tell librarians just how many books should bring them joy and how many deserve a spot on their bookshelves. I would like to suggest that school librarians can apply at least one of Marie Kondo's lessons to our own in the library, and that is a reasonable message that we can convey to our students regardless of their age, and that is that you don't need to own every single book you plan to read. We can emphasize rather the importance of book access instead of that of book ownership. I understand the efforts by very well-intentioned parents and grandparents who purchase books for their children in the hopes that owning a book will somehow guarantee that child will read the book. And I try to reassure my students that we share our library books with everyone so that books don't take over our house. I love reading the story, The Library, written by Sarah Stewart and illustrated by her husband, David Small, to my first graders. They learn about Elizabeth Brown, whose love of books eventually took over her entire house. It is an excellent opportunity to have my students imagine what would happen if they kept every book they ever wanted to read in their house. The story ends with Elizabeth Brown walking into town and giving all that I own to the town to create the Elizabeth Brown Free Library. The dedication in the book would indicate that this is based on a true person, although my digital digging has not been able to confirm this theory. It is worth mentioning when discussing clutter and books, which may never give you joy, are those of college textbooks. Students can now rent them, and this is an option I never had. Our only options were buy new, buy used, and take a chance with an older edition, and in both cases you could sell them back, but for a fraction of your investment, usually about 10%. We also had the option to scramble for the handful of copies on reserve at the undergraduate library, but that seemed like a really risky option. My daughter, who attends the University of Michigan's nursing school, has an even better solution when it comes to textbooks than we ever did, and that is renting them for the semester. I asked her to give me an example of one of the books she's rented, Developmental Psychology, which sells for $216 brand new, $147 used, or she can rent a copy for 6 months for $40, which includes shipping both ways. She also has the option to return the book within the first 3 weeks for a full refund if her schedule changes. I know I didn't find joy in the 4 years of accumulated textbooks which languished in a milk crate for years after I graduated. Finally, and this is a rather predictable consequence of the popularity of Marie Kondo's Netflix series, and that is libraries of all kinds can expect a surge of book donations thanks to the fans of this show and the inspiration of Marie Kondo's message. Depending on how you feel about donations from families, I've had mixed results. When families graduate from elementary school and their youngest moves to middle school, I have on more than one occasion been the recipient of hand-me-down books. Ironically, while my library isn't the beneficiary of our school book fair, a large percentage of our books that I receive are accumulated from years of attending the PTO book fairs. And in most cases, these books have only been read once or twice, and the donations are eventually processed for our library. I do send a thank you note to the family, and I make sure that any names or writing on the inside cover is covered up with some oversized labels. I wanted to consider children's books authored by celebrities today. Over the years, I've inherited many in my collection. I'm responsible for purchasing a few. But I do wonder, why do we buy these books? What motivates these purchases? The mistake is to give celebrity authors a pass because they're famous in another arena, and I'm sure I'm not alone because I consider these titles with some initial skepticism. I allow some time to see the reviews and the criticism before I decide to include celebrity titles in my collection. It also makes one wonder what motivates these stars to consider writing a children's book. Was it their agent? Was it when they became parents, or in some cases grandparents, that they were inspired? I don't think it's uncommon for authors of any background to find inspiration after becoming a parent. Kelly Clarkson wrote River Rose and the Magical Lullaby, which was inspired by her daughter, coincidentally named River Rose. A more concerning suspicion I've had when I hear some random person wants to write a book for children is, do they think it's easy? That just anyone can decide one day, hey, I can write a children's book. How hard can it be? But it is curious. In almost every case I can think of, the students don't care who this person is, and why should they? I loved Jamie Lee Curtis in A Fish Called Wanda, but no 5 or 6-year-old would have ever seen her in a movie. I have given some background when using celebrity authors and introducing them, and sometimes I think it makes sense to the students. For example, Jeff Foxworthy is a stand-up comedian, and his books are really funny. Henry Winkler has dyslexia, and like his character, Hank Zipser, found ways to hide it when taping Happy Days, and his "eh" was in fact a cover because he couldn't memorize his lines fast enough. There are, in my opinion, some wonderful surprises and exceptions. I love using Jamie Lee Curtis's books with my kindergarten and first graders. The partnership with Laura Cornell, the illustrator, is fantastic, and these books do really well during story time. John Lithgow is best known as an actor, but he's also a Harvard alum, and his CD, Singing in the Bathtub, was a favorite during our family road trips. A fun lesson to share with the music teacher in your building, and I've included a YouTube of this orchestral performance, is the reading of the remarkable Farkle McBride, and that's an introduction to the instruments in the orchestra. I found a great interview, and I'll include a link in the show notes, when John Lithgow was interviewed about his 7th children's book. He said, quote, "The book also used advanced language because it will encourage children to be curious about language. And all my books, as I say, they're intended to give kids a good time, but they all have an agenda. They're all there to get them thinking about the arts and education and the use of language. I don't shy away from, words like imprudence. My ideal is for a child to listen to the story read by a parent and to say, 'Mom, what does peregrination mean?' And for the mom to actually not know." End quote. As a parent who had to read, and eventually I memorized many of John Lithgow's books, I was amused at the expectation he placed on me as the reader to have the definitions ready when I was put on the spot at story time. Another title, which gets a lot of attention for the celebrity, is The Sandwich Swap, which is co-authored by Queen Reina of Jordan and Kelly DiPuccio. And my students are very interested when I tell them that this is the only book in my collection, to my knowledge, which is written by a real queen. My diversity team regularly circulates this book, and having been in many lunchrooms over the years, I know that this message of acceptance and learning to appreciate our differences, even if it is over our lunchbox, is an important one. In addition to the celebrities I've mentioned, celebrity authors, although this could never be a comprehensive list and in no particular order, include many famous people you might recognize: Trevor Noah, Madonna, Will Smith, Jay Leno, Ricky Gervais, Jerry Seinfeld, and I will say his Halloween book is a favorite year-round with my students. Bruce Springsteen, Weird Al Yankovic, Bethany Frankel of Real Housewives fame, Paris Hilton, Steve Martin, Bill Cosby, Brooke Shields, Keith Richards, Jim Carrey, Whoopi Goldberg, and Bob Dylan, Billy Crystal, Alex Rodriguez, Derek Jeter, Ray Romano, Mario Lopez, John Travolta, Dom DeLuise, Taye Diggs, Julie Andrews, who co-authored more than 20 books with her daughter, Tori Spelling, Julianne Moore, Sting, Jewel, Katie Couric, Spike Lee, Queen Latifah, Sharon Osbourne, Jada Pinkett Smith, Jimmy Buffett, Bette Midler, Dolly Parton, Jason Alexander, Carly Simon, Peyton and Eli and Archie Manning, Kathy Lee Gifford, Tim McGraw, Fran Drescher, Joy Behar, Maria Shriver, Leanne Rimes, George Foreman, Terrell Owens, Chris Colfer, Bernadette Peters, Judy Collins, Christy Yamaguchi, Tiki Barber, Rhea Perlman, Cal Ripken Jr., Diane Warwick, Sarah, Duchess of York, and Jerry Garcia. I am sure this list will only continue to grow. As a children's librarian, it does not surprise me when I get book and library-inspired gifts, like the silly socks that I got in my stocking for Christmas this year. What did surprise me was unwrapping the 2 parody picture books, Goodnight Trump and Whose Boat Is This Boat?, which I opened up on Christmas Day. This certainly isn't the first time that Margaret Brown's Goodnight Moon has been refashioned. If you've ever heard of the Goodnight iPad by Droyd, I've included a YouTube version in the show notes, which is really fun to watch. I do want to say that there is some overlap today with next week's episode on self-censorship. In most cases, the authors are not politicians, as with the issue of celebrity authors, but the authors have very public political leanings. There's evidence of our current political happenings creeping into children's literature. A fascinating article came out on November 12, 2018 in The Guardian by Zoe Williams titled, "Why Political Books for Kids Are More Popular Than Ever." I'll include a link in the show notes. It begins, quote, "All children's books are political because everything is," end quote. Ms. Williams continues, referring to past convention, quote, "Yet children's literature with a progressive political bent was traditionally frowned upon, often held to be politicizing and thereby exploiting the malleable young mind. That has been turned on its head. It's not so much that authors don't recognize the politics in their own work, rather they have decided en masse that the miniatures are ready for it," end quote. And by the way, I'm going to refer to my children as the miniatures from now on. I've heard other people call them littles, and I think that's kind of fun, but miniatures just makes me smile. So for the much of the same reason that my morning routine includes consulting the BBC Online for its take on world news, and most especially a global perspective on our news, I am very much enthralled with The Guardian, which is a daily British publication, and its perspective on the world of publishing and children's literature. Similarly, Joe Pinsker, writing for The Atlantic on November 11th, 2018, said, quote, "All children's books are political in the sense that their authors make choices about who to include and who to exclude, which values to promote and which to downplay," End quote. This is worth mentioning here, and one noted trend that with the politicization of children's literature is the increasingly tendency to have diversity and non-white protagonists. And this was found in a U.S. study which revealed an increase from 14% in 2016 to that of 25% in 2017. And this statistic has been cited in several other articles referenced by today's podcast. I was especially intrigued by the point that, quote, picture books, a category for which the intended audience and the buyers are two very different groups. In this sense, woke picture books can be thought of as products for parents, helping them distill some of the day's most fraught cultural issues into little narrative lessons for their kids, end quote. This is a crucial distinction because we know parents aren't the only ones who purchase books for children. School librarians do as well. And as we so often act in loco parentis, the question here is, do woke picture books create a conflict for us as stewards of the collection? I'm thinking about John Agee's The Wall in the Middle of the Book. In the Kirkus review, concludes with, quote, with too much attention toward outward threats, the night neglects to see those from within, a timeless message, but also one that, in 2018, will surely strike a chord with many readers, end quote. I'll include a link in the show notes. This observation is also hinted in an interview with host Mel Schuett and John Agee in episode 85 of Let's Talk Picture Books, posted on October 9th, 2018. Again, a link in the show notes. John said of his character in The Wall, quote, we all know people like this, people who are frightened of the unknown, of things that are different. Anyway, this concept, maybe it was inspired by contemporary events. I don't know, but it appealed to me, end quote. Again, a link in the show notes. How evident is our own bias reflected in our collection? Is there a place in our collection for all of these books? Do we need to provide equity and balanced representation? Many Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg books and Justice Sotomayor books are out there. Are we obligated to find other Supreme Court justices on the more conservative side of the bench and have representation in our collection for those people as well? What about Rush Limbaugh and his Rush Revere and the Brave Pilgrims? Chelsea Clinton's She Persisted, and She Persisted Around the World. Barack Obama's Of Thee I Sing, A Letter to My Daughters. And Kristen Gillibrand's The Bold and Brave. On November 6, 2018, Publishers Weekly posted Claire Kirsch's article, Trumpian Political Humor, a fine line between children's books and parody. They look like children's books, but are they really for children? I'll include a link in the show notes. And then there's the issue of political parodies in the form of children's books, which have flooded the market. Goodnight Trump, Whose Boat Is This Boat? Please Don't Grab My... I'll insert a word for cat here. My Amazing Book About Tremendous Me. Donald Drains the Swamp. Donald and the Golden Crayon. A Child's First Book of Trump. A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo. And at least two cases, Stephen Colbert and John Oliver's books. Although they were not the authors, the proceeds from the sales of these books went directly to charity. Said the author of Donald and the Golden Crayon, quote, the great thing about a children's book format is that it is precise and contained. A great picture book is like a great pop song. It's short, has a hook, is emotionally engaging and satisfying, and can be enjoyed over and over, end quote. This might explain the enormous popularity in the choice of format of children's books. It is fair to expect that these types of books will continue to be published at least until the 2020 presidential election. I would like to thank you for listening today. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Share this podcast with other school librarians in your district and your PLN. consider leaving a rating as it helps other school librarians learn about this podcast. I would like to thank composer Nazar Ryback at hooksounds.com for the music you've heard today. And as always, I invite your feedback and contributions. Please email me at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. The topic of our next episode will be Self-Censorship is Real. I hope you will tune in.